Hello everyone to your third C++ tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to give a brief introduction to variables. So what the hell are variables? In case you can't read, I'm gonna read this definition here. So variables are basically containers that store data such as numbers, character, words. So in our code we will need to store a number in some sort of container or a character or a word. So this is what variables basically are. Now, variables are declared in our program as follows. We say the type of variable we're going to use. We write here the type. It could be integer, floats. We're going to explain them later in this tutorial, and we name it whatever we want. There is a naming convention, some rules you're going to follow when you name your variable. We're going to discuss them also. So basically you say the type and then you name it something and you set it, assign it equal to some sort of value. In case it is an integer, you set it equal to a number. If it is a float, which means decimals, you set it to a number. If it is word or whatever, you put a word here. So this is basically it. It's when you declare something like this, it stores in a block of memory a certain value of a certain type, and we can call it by some sort of name. So basically this is it. Consider this as a memory block somewhere in our computer. When we write this, it assigns a memory block for this value. It is of a certain type and it has a certain name. So here we're going to discuss the 5 most common variable data types in coding, basically, and programming. So the first one we're going to discuss is integer. Int. We write int as integer. So it stores non-decimal numbers. If you want to store non-decimal numbers such as 420, for example, we put it inside an integer. So here is an example of how to write it inside our code. We set type and then naming and then equal to a value. So here we see the type is integer, the name is number1, and it is equal to a value which is 420, and then the semicolon, which basically ends a command. Semicolons are basically put at the end of every command we declare. Now you're just gonna have to memorize when to use it and when to not use it. We'll basically use it at the end of every line. It is used in most programming languages except for Python, because Python is stupid. I don't know why. So yes, this is it. You're gonna get familiar with this semicolon here. So when we write this code in our program, this is what happens basically. We store in a block of memory in our computer somewhere the value 420, which is of type integer. It knows that it is an integer, and we assign a name to it, which is number1, in case we need to call it later. We'll see that in the code later. Now moving on to floats. So float basically stores decimal numbers. So here we can't write something like 420.5. It will just cross the 5. We will see this in the code also. So if we want to store decimal numbers, we can use floats. Float stores decimal numbers. So here's an example. Float number 2 equal 4.25. So this is what happens. We store 4.25 in a block called number 2, and it is of type float. Now there are also characters, char, which stores a single character. We can't use multiple characters. It stores only a single character, such as letters, numbers, or signs. Example, char C. So character called C equal to, we've put single quotations, wrap the character in single quotation, and we write whatever character we want. So for example, question mark. So we have a character called C and it stores a question mark. Now we said this only stores single characters. If you want to store like multiple characters, we would use something like string. So string stores full text, basically multiple characters, an array of characters if you want. You'll know what array means later. Anyways, so it stores full text as multiple characters. Example, we declare it string, the type is string, and it's called s equal hello, and we store them in double quotations. Strings are in double quotations, characters are in single quotations, and here is the demonstration of what happens when we write this code. Now booleans. Booleans are basically variable data types that store only true or false values. So bool happy equal false. We have a boolean called happy, and it can be either true or false. This is the only values that boolean stores. You're gonna see later in our code that uh, false is represented by a 0 and true is represented by a 1. So that's it, let's jump to the code. Alright then, so here in our code, these are the slides basically. If you want more slides, study at a university, they give multiple useless slides. Here we're going to apply the code. So we said we want to declare an integer. Let's say, write a comment for example, or let me actually declare it. So we say integer. Now here is how we name any variable. First of all, you can't start with numbers. This will give an error, as you can see here. So you can't start with numbers. It should start with letters or something like that. So let's say number. Now if you wanna leave a space, you can't do that. It will not understand it, so you can't also do something like that. If you wanna leave spaces, basically write an underscore like this. So we now have integer, which is called number1, and we need to assign a value to it. You could write a number here if you want. This works. You just can't put it at the beginning of the variable name. You need to put it at the end of the variable name. So number1, 1. This integer is equal to, let's say, 420. That was our example, yes. Now, if you want to store decimal numbers, we said we use float. So this is the second number is equal to, let's say, 4.25. So here we are declaring an integer. No, you could write, just to clarify our code, we write the comment declaring a float. Same thing here, we're gonna write, for example, booleans. We said boolean happy equal false, because we're coding, we can't be happy, we're programmers, we are programmed to be sad, whatever, bad jokes, ignore them. So we are declaring a boolean. Yes, bool is short for boolean. And then character, for example, C equal, let's use a letter instead of question mark. Let's say A. Okay, and then string called as and equal to some text. Let's say hello world. Okay, so now we can display these values here through display them on the screen. For example, let's say we wanna like see out, say our integer is, now we want to display the value stored inside number1 here, not so basically if you want to do that, if you remember a few tutorials, the first tutorial we wrote something like 420 and this worked. We wrote 69 actually here and it worked. We said something like this and it worked, and if we try it now it also works. Okay, let's wait. As you can see, it gives our integer is 420. Now let's say you want to change this. You change it to 400 for example. And you want to display always what is displayed in number1, what is stored in number1. You want to display what is stored in number1. So instead of writing the number as itself, you write a variable name. You might change that later in the code, number1 for example, and now it stores whatever, it displays whatever is stored in number1. I don't know why I'm mixing up between storing and displaying. They're completely different things. I'm not focused anyway. So let's say let us display the rest of this. Our float is second number. sorry, this is the name of it, second number. As you can see, it highlights here and here, which means they are the same thing. Let's run it. Our integer is 400, our float is 4.25. Make sure just to write it not in the quotations. Anything you write in the quotations to get displayed as it is. Not the values, not anything, just as it is. If you want to display the value of something, of a variable, you write it alone, like this. And you can, if you want to write something else here, for example, end of line 2, you could do that also, in case you're wondering how to write after the variable. So yeah, that's it. Now you're wondering what happens, for example, if we did something like this. We have an integer storing a decimal. So how does it display? Well, it just removes anything after the decimal point. So 0.6 was removed. As you can see here, it only displayed 400. So yeah, that's it. Now I will just copy paste here this one and show you the rest. So our boolean is, now the boolean name is happy, so happy, and then this one, our character is C, and then why am I copying this? Okay, whatever. Our string is S. So now what happens? Let's run this. Okay, so our integer is 400, our float is 4.25, end of line 2. We need to leave a space here, something like this. It would have worked with the spacing. And our boolean is 0, which represents false. If you had it true, it would have wrote 1. Our character is A, I will show that next. Our character is A, our string is hello world, as you can see. So it's just displaying values, and let's just to clarify this. We could write either false or true. These are the only values in a boolean. And here we'll have the space. Now notice the slight difference. So our integer is 400, our float is 4.25, end of line 2, so it displayed this. Our boolean is 1, so 1 means true. Our character is A, our string is hello world. So yeah, that's it. In the next tutorial we're going to discuss some more data types, but these are basically the main ones here. We're just gonna show different ones just for the sake of knowing them. You might use them one day later on in your coding career, which will never take off. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. See you.